Do you think that there is a threat or an increased threat of far right extremism in Australia?
There definitely is. So as a concrete indicator, ASIO has reported a significant increase in right-wing extremism and what it's now terming as ideologically motivated violent extremism, active cases that they're investigating over the last 3 years. So in 2020, they reported 33%, in 2021, 40%, and in 2022, ASIO said that overall, the caseload had decreased since the same time last year, but they'd had an increase in radicalisation and specific issue grievances, which is what they're using to refer to things like the anti-vax, anti-public health lockdowns, anti-government movements that we've seen really grow over COVID. And I think that is, they are arguably movements that overlap to different extents with what we broadly term right-wing violent extremism in Australia today.
Some research has argued that social media manipulation is not as strong as we think, which means that social media cannot make people do things that they otherwise wouldn't do. How then people get radicalized? How do people get radicalized online? Because some research also suggests there's a strong probability that the way we interact with social media or where we interact can radicalize us.
Absolutely. Look, I think that broadly speaking, I don't think we can say there's enough research with sound empirical basis to say we understand comprehensively or in a generally applicable way how radicalization towards violent extremism works. I think it's a really growing space, and there's some wonderful, exciting new research happening that we're coming to understand it more. But one of the things that's coming out in that research is that this is a very diverse process for different people, different violent extremist groups in different places, and even just for different individuals. So it's hard to map this is how radicalization occurs, and therefore this is what perhaps a government response should be to build specific resilience in particular communities to that. What we do know is that right-wing violent extremist groups, narratives, perpetrators, and ideologies have demonstrably risen globally in recent years, and that social media platforms have definitely played an important part in that. Now, the role that they've played that we can be certain of is they provide a platform, a space to meet and incubate those ideas, to broadcast ideas and planning documents, to publicize specific attacks, to publicize plans for attacks, and even to publicize, right-wing extremist motivated crimes, to share financial and planning resources. We've seen social media used for things that look relatively small and harmless, like the Buy Me a Coffee applications. And it's really hard to see how much funding you can even raise through those kinds of means. So I would summarize it saying that social media is a platform to inspire one another internationally in that space, to recruit people for at least parts of that sort of radicalization and recruitment process, and to share resources, both financial and planning.
Does radicalization, specifically talking in terms of use of technology and online radicalization, does it always translate into violence in the offline world?
I don't think it always translates into physical violence, but I think it is compelling to suggest, and if we look at parallels like gender-based violence, to argue that if it becomes more normalized and acceptable and permissible to discuss and promote ideas about violence in communities, it then becomes more permissible, probable, and likely for particular individuals to actually act on those ideas and to act them out physically.
Can social media platforms flag behavioral signs that may be a result of radicalization? I mean, something these companies may not be doing so thoroughly at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Look, my understanding is that social media platforms and also over-the-top messaging services like WhatsApp, for example, already have algorithms in place to analyze, flag, and report content that indicates either overt radicalization or terrorist activity and planning. I'm not a technology expert, so honestly, I can't speak to whether that can be done in a more thorough way, but I think it is important to task industry with playing the appropriate role in combating radicalization. And this is both in order to achieve impact through industry's actions and to avoid confusing how online radicalization knows. So on the one hand, the 2022 ASIO threat assessment told us that most of the radicalisation in Australia occurs online, but some of it also happens in person and face to face. It was also said that that was followed up with that, unlike past trends in radicalisation, many of the young people in Australia radicalising don't actually come from families where a parent or a sibling or a trusted other already holds those extreme views. So I think this clearly shows that this cohort of increasingly radicalizing young people, and when I say increasing, I mean radicalizing from a younger age and more of them radicalizing, that they're being exposed to something on digital platforms that they're not encountering in their lives offline, which is to some extent contributing to their radicalization. And that might be perhaps initiating, exacerbating, or enabling the process. It could be happening at different points, we can't tell. And it's really hard to measure or prove what they're getting online and what process it's taking them further, what part of the process it's taking them further on, because it's hard to monitor this and get measurable evidence. So I'd say that yes, digital platforms are clearly accountable for monitoring and removing extremist content online, but there's significant challenges for them doing so. And when I said that we need to task them correctly, it's that I think there's two challenges. So right now, there's democratically legitimate far-right politics in Australia. And by that, I mean elected officials and who have a right to free speech, even if I disagree with them. Then there's also illegitimate right-wing and ideologically motivated violent extremist ideologies. But these two blur increasingly. And during COVID, they've blurred increasingly on the subject of, for example, public health lockdowns. So how could a platform comprehensively draw, navigate, and police this line in their content if some of our elected officials routinely failed to do so?
Which I think it's time for Australian parliamentarians and policymakers to start having that discussion, specifically that ASIO has been talking about the threat of this lone attacker lingering somewhere, specifically as you already mentioned, that the situation became worse during pandemic lockdowns, people being pushed to the margins, and then more use of internet space as well. Teagan, thank you very much for being part of this brief discussion. And I think along the points that you've just mentioned, I would really love to see somewhere policymakers and digital companies intersecting so that we can save the use of internet becoming of the face of some dystopian future where we definitely wouldn't want our generations to go. So thank you so much, Teagan.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Aisha.